Tantor Audio presents Half-Blood by Jennifer L. Armentrout. Narrated by Justine Eyre. Chapter 1. My eyes snapped open as a freakish sixth sense kicked my fight-or-flight response into overdrive. The Georgia humidity and the dust covering the floor made it hard to breathe. Since I'd fled Miami, no place had been safe. This abandoned factory had proved no different. The demons were here. I could hear them on the lower level, searching each room systematically, throwing open doors, slamming them shut. The sound threw me back to a few days ago, when I'd pushed open the door to Mom's bedroom. She'd been in the arms of one of those monsters beside a broken pot of hibiscus flowers. Purple petals had spilled across the floor, mixing with the blood. The memory twisted my gut into a raw ache, but I couldn't think about her right now. I jumped to my feet, halting in the narrow hallway, straining to hear how many demons were here. 3? More? My fingers jerked around the slim handle of the garden spade. I held it up, running my fingers over the sharp edges plated in titanium. The act reminded me of what needed to be done. Demons loathed titanium. Besides decapitation, which was way too gross, titanium was the only thing that would kill them. Named after the Titans, the precious metal was poisonous to those addicted to ether. Somewhere in the building, a floorboard groaned and gave way. A deep howl broke the silence, starting as a low whine before hitting an intense, shrill pitch. The scream sounded inhuman, sick, and horrifying. Nothing in this world sounded like a demon, a hungry demon. And it was close. I darted down the hallway, my tattered sneakers pounding against the worn-out boards. Speed was in my blood, and strands of long, dirty hair streamed behind me. I rounded the corner, knowing I had only seconds. A whoosh of stale air whirled around me as the demon grabbed a handful of my shirt, slamming me into the wall. Dust and plaster floated through the air. Black starbursts dotted my vision as I scrambled to my feet. Those soulless, pitch-black holes where eyes should have been seemed to stare at me like I was his next meal ticket. The demon grasped my shoulder, and I let instinct take over. I twisted around, catching the surprise flickering across his pale face a split second before I kicked. My foot connected with the side of his head. The impact sent him staggering into the opposite wall. I spun around, slamming my hand into him. Surprise turned to horror as the demon looked down at the garden spade buried deep in his stomach. It didn't matter where we aimed. Titanium always killed a demon. A guttural sound escaped his gaping mouth before he exploded into a shimmery blue dust. With the spade still in hand, I whirled around and took the steps 2 at a time. I ignored the ache in my hips as I sprinted across the floor. I was going to make it. I had to make it. I'd be super pissed in the afterlife if I died a virgin in this crap hole. Little half-blood, where are you running to? I stumbled to the side, falling into a large steel press. Twisting around, my heart slammed against my ribs. The demon appeared a few feet behind me. Like the one upstairs, he looked like a freak. His mouth hung open, exposing sharp, serrated teeth, and those all-black holes sent chills over my skin. They reflected no light or life, only signifying death. His cheeks were sunken, skin unearthly pale. Veins popped out, etching over his face like inky snakes. He truly looked like something out of my worst nightmare, something demonic. Only a half-blood could see through the glamour for a few moments. Then the elemental magic took over, revealing what he used to look like. Adonis came to mind, a blonde, stunning man. "What are you doing all alone?" he asked, voice deep and alluring. I took a step back, my eyes searching the room for an exit. Wannabe Adonis blocked my way out, and I knew I couldn't stand still for long. Demons could still wield control over the elements. If he hit me with air or fire, I was a goner. He laughed, the sound lacking humor and life. "Maybe if you beg, and I mean really beg, I'll let your death be a fast one. Frankly, half-bloods don't really do it for me. Pure bloods, on the other hand," he let out a sound of pleasure. "They're like fine dining. Half-bloods, you're more like fast food." Come one step closer and you'll end up like your buddy upstairs. I hoped I sounded threatening enough. Not likely. Try me. His brows rose. Now you're starting to upset me. That's 2 of us you've killed. You keeping a tally or something? My heart stopped when the floor behind me creaked. I whirled around, spotting a female demon. She inched closer, forcing me toward the other demon. They were caging me in, giving no opportunity to escape. Another one shrieked somewhere in the pile of crap. Panic and fear choked me. My stomach rolled violently as my fingers trembled around the garden spade. Gods, I wanted to puke. The ringleader advanced on me. Do you know what I'm going to do to you? I swallowed and fixed a smirk on my face. Blah, blah, you're gonna kill me. Blah, I know. The female's ravenous shriek cut off his response. Obviously, she was very hungry. She circled me like a vulture, ready to rip into me. My eyes narrowed on her. The hungry ones were always the stupidest, the weakest of the bunch. Legend said it was the first taste of ether, the very life force running through our blood that possessed a pure blood. A single taste turned one into a demon and resulted in a lifetime of addiction. There was a good chance I could get past her. The other one, well, he was a different story. I fainted toward the female. Like a druggie going after her fix, she came right at me. The male yelled at her to stop, but it was too late. I took off in the opposite direction like an Olympic sprinter, rushing for the door I'd kicked in earlier in the night. Once outside, the odds would be back in my favor. A small window of hope sparked alive and propelled me forward. The worst possible thing happened. A wall of flames flew up in front of me, burning through benches and shooting at least 8 feet into the air. It was real, no illusion. The heat blew back at me and the fire crackled, eating through the walls. In front of me, he walked right through the flames, looking every bit like a demon hunter should. The fire did not singe his pants nor dirty his shirt. Not a single dark hair was touched by the blaze, those cool, storm cloud-colored eyes fixed on me. It was him, Aiden St. Delphi. I'd never forget his name or face. The first time I'd caught a glimpse of him standing in front of the training arena, a ridiculous crush had sprung alive. I'd been 14, and he 17. The fact he was a pureblood hadn't mattered whenever I'd spotted him around campus. Aiden's presence could mean one thing only. The Sentinels had arrived. Our eyes met, and then he looked over my shoulder. Get down. I didn't need to be told twice. Like a pro, I hit the floor. The pulse of heat shot above me, crashing into the intended target. The floor shook with the demon's wild threshing, and her wounded screams filled the air. Only titanium would kill a demon, but I felt confident that being burnt alive didn't feel too good. Rising up on my elbows, I peered through my dirty hair as Aiden lowered his hand. A popping sound followed the movement, and the flames vanished as fast as they appeared. Within seconds, only the smells of burnt wood, flesh, and smoke remained. 2 more sentinels rushed the room. I recognized one of them, Cain Poros, a half-blood a year or so older than me. Once upon a time we trained together. Cain moved with a grace he'd never had before. He went for the female, and with one quick swoop, he thrust a long, slender dagger into the burnt flesh of her skin. She too became nothing but dust. The other sentinel had the air of a pureblood to him, but I'd never seen him before. He was big, steroids big, and he zeroed in on the demon I knew was somewhere in this factory but hadn't seen yet. Watching how he moved such a large body around so gracefully made me feel sorely inadequate, especially considering I was still lying sprawled on the floor. I dragged myself to my feet, feeling the terror-fueled adrenaline rush fade. Without warning, my head exploded in pain as the side of my face hit the floor hard. Stunned and confused, it took me a moment to realize the wannabe Adonis had gotten a hold of my legs. I twisted, but the creep sank his hands deep into my hair and yanked my head back. I dug my fingers into his skin, but it did nothing to alleviate the pressure bearing down on my neck. For a startled moment, I thought he intended to rip my head right off, but he sank razor-sharp teeth into my shoulder, tearing through fabric and flesh. I screamed, really screamed. I was on fire. I had to be. The draining burned through my skin. Sharp pricks radiated out through every cell in my body. And even though I was only a half-blood, not chock full of ether like a pure-blood, the demon continued to drink my essence as though I were. It wasn't my blood he was after. He'd swallow pints of it just to get at the ether. My very spirit shifted as he dragged it into him. Pain became everything. Suddenly, the demon lifted his mouth. "What are you?" His whispered voice slurred the words. There was no time to even think about that question. He was ripped off me and my body slumped forward. I rolled into a messy, bloody ball, sounding more like a wounded animal than anything remotely human. It was the first time I'd ever gotten tagged, drained by a demon. Over the small sounds I made, I heard a sickening crunch, and then wild shrieks, but the pain had taken over my senses. It started to pull back from my fingers, sliding its way back to my core, where it still blazed. I tried to breathe through it, but damn! Gentle hands rolled me onto my back, prying my fingers away from my shoulder. I stared up at Aiden. "Are you okay? Alexandria, please say something." "Alex," I choked out. "Everyone calls me Alex." He gave a short, relieved laugh. "Okay, good. Alex, can you stand?" I think I nodded. Every few seconds a stabbing flash of heat rocked through me, but the hurt had faded into a dull ache. That really sucked something bad. Aiden managed to get one arm around me, lifting me to my feet. I swayed as he brushed back my hair and took a look at the damage. "Give it a few minutes. The pain will wear off." Lifting my head, I looked around. Kane and the other sentinel were frowning at nearly identical piles of blue dust. The pure-blood faced us. "That should be all of them." Aiden nodded. "Alex, we need to go. Now, back to the Covenant." The Covenant? Not entirely in control of my emotions, I turned to Aiden. He wore all black, the uniform sentinels wore. For a hot second, that girly crush resurfaced from 3 years ago. Aiden looked sublime, but fury stomped down that stupid crush. The Covenant was involved in this coming to my rescue? Where the hell had they been when one of the demons had snuck into our house? He took a step forward, but I didn't see him. I saw my mother's lifeless body again. The last thing she ever saw on this earth was some god-awful demon's face, and the last thing she'd ever felt... I shuddered, remembering the body-ripping pain of the demon's tag. Aiden took another step toward me. I reacted, a response born out of anger and pain. I launched myself at him, using moves I hadn't practiced in years. Simple things like kicks and punches were one thing, but an offensive attack was something I'd barely learned. He caught my hand and swung me around so I faced the other direction. In a matter of seconds, he had my arms pinned, but all the pain and the sorrow rose in me, overriding any common sense. I bent forward, intent on getting enough space between us to deliver a vicious back kick. "Don't," Aiden warned, his voice deceptively soft. "I don't want to hurt you." My breath came out harsh and ragged. I could feel the warm blood trickling down my neck, mixing with sweat. I kept fighting, even though my head swam, and the fact that Aiden held me off so easily only made my world turn red with rage. "Whoa!" Kane yelled from the sidelines. "Alex, you know us. Don't you remember me? We aren't going to hurt you." "Shut up!" I broke free of Aiden's grasp, dodging Kane and Mr. Steroids. None of them expected me to run from them, but that's what I did. I made it to the door leading out of the factory, dodged the broken wood, and rushed outside. My feet carried me toward the field across the street. My thoughts were a complete mess. Why was I running? Hadn't I been trying to get back to the Covenant since the demon attack in Miami? My body didn't want to do this, but I kept running through the tall weeds and prickly bushes. Heavy footsteps sounded behind me, growing closer and closer. My vision blurred a bit. My heart thundered in my chest. I was so confused, so... A hard body crashed into me, knocking the air right out of my lungs. I went down in a spiraling mess of legs and arms. Somehow Aiden twisted around and took the brunt of the fall. I landed on top of him, and I stayed there for a moment before he rolled me over, pinning me down into the itchy field grass. Panic and rage burst through me. Now? Where were you a week ago? Where was the Covenant when my mother was being killed? Where were you? Aiden jerked back, eyes wide. I'm sorry. We didn't... His apology only angered me further. I wanted to hurt him. I wanted to make him let me go. I didn't know what the hell I wanted, but I couldn't stop myself from screaming, clawing, and kicking him. Only when Aiden pressed his long, lean body against mine did I stop. His weight, the close proximity, held me immobile. There wasn't an inch of space between us. I could feel the hard ripple of his abdominal muscles pressing against my stomach, could feel his lips only inches from mine. Suddenly, I entertained a wild idea. I wondered if his lips felt as good as they looked, because they looked awesome. That was a wrong thought to have. I had to be crazy, the only plausible excuse for what I was doing and thinking. The way I stared at his lips, or the fact I desperately wanted to be kissed, all wrong for a multitude of reasons. Besides the fact I just tried to knock his head off, I looked like a mess. Grime dirtied my face beyond recognition. I hadn't showered in a week, and I was pretty sure I smelled. I was that gross. But the way he lowered his head, I really thought he was going to kiss me. My entire body tensed in anticipation, like waiting to be kissed for the first time, and this was definitely not the first time I'd been kissed. I'd kissed lots of boys, but not him. Not a pure blood. Aiden shifted, pressing down further. I inhaled sharply, and my mind raced 1,000,000 miles a second, spewing out nothing helpful. He moved his right hand to my forehead. Warning bells went off. He murmured a compulsion, fast and low, too quick for me to make out the words. Son of a... A sudden darkness rushed me, void of thought and meaning. There was no fighting something that powerful, and without getting out so much as a word of protest, I sank into its murky depths. Chapter 2. Whatever my head rested on felt firm, but oddly comfortable. I snuggled closer, feeling safe and warm, something I hadn't felt since Mom pulled my butt from the Covenant 3 years ago. Jumping from place to place rarely afforded such a comfort. Something wasn't right. My eyes flew open. Son of a bitch. I jerked back from Aiden's shoulder so fast I cracked my head against the window. Crap! He turned toward me, his dark brows high. Are you okay? I ignored the concern in his voice and glared at him. I had no idea how long I'd been out of it. Judging by the deep blue of the sky outside the tinted windows, I guessed it had been hours. Pures weren't supposed to use compulsions on halves who weren't in servitude. It was considered highly unethical, since compulsions stripped people of free will, choice, and everything. Damn Hematoi. Not that they ever cared about ethics. Before the original demigods had died, along with Hercules and Perseus, they'd all shacked up with each other in the way only the Greeks could. Those unions had produced the purebloods, the Hematoi, a very, very powerful race. They could wield control over the 4 elements, air, water, fire, and earth, and manipulate that raw power into spells and compulsions. Pures never were to use their gifts against another pure. Doing so meant imprisonment, or even death in some cases. Being a half-blood, the product of a pureblood and ordinary old human, a mongrel by pure standards, I had no control over the elements. My kind was gifted with the same strength and speed the pures had, but we had an extra special gift that set us apart. We could see through the elemental magic the demons used. The pures couldn't. There were a lot of us halves running around, probably more than purebloods. Considering pures married to improve their position in our society instead of marrying for love, they tended to fool around a lot. Being that they weren't susceptible to diseases that plagued mortals, I figured they assumed it was okay to forego protection. As it turned out, their half-blood offspring served a very valuable position in the pureblood society. Alex. Aiden frowned as he watched me. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. I scowled while taking in my surroundings. We were in something big, probably one of the Covenant's super large Hummers that could plow over an entire village. Pures weren't concerned with things like money and gas mileage. The bigger, the better, was their unofficial motto. The other Pure, the enormous one, was behind the wheel, and Kane sat in the passenger seat, silently staring out the window. Where are we?
We're on the coast, just outside of Bald Head Island. We're almost to Deity Island,
Aiden answered. My heart jumped. What?
We're going back to the Covenant, Alex.
The Covenant, the place I'd trained and called home up until 3 years ago. Sighing, I rubbed the back of my head. Did the Covenant send you, or was it my stepfather?
The Covenant.
I breathed easier. My pure-blooded stepfather wouldn't be happy to see me. You work for the Covenant now?
No, I'm just a sentinel. I'm more on loan for the time being. Your uncle sent us to find you.
Aiden paused, glancing out the window.
A lot has changed since you've been gone.
I wanted to ask what a sentinel got accomplished on the well-protected Deity Island, but I figured it wasn't any of my business. What's changed?
Well, your uncle is now the Dean of the Covenant.
Marcus? Wait, what? What happened to Dean Nasso?
He died about 2 years ago.
Oh, no big surprise there. He'd been old as dirt. I didn't say anything else as I mulled over the fact my uncle was now Dean Andros. Ugh, I made a face. I barely knew the man, but the last I remembered, he'd been working his way up through the pure blood politics. I shouldn't be surprised he'd found his way into such a coveted position.
Alex, I'm sorry about the compulsion back there.
Aiden broke the silence that had stretched between us.
I didn't want you to hurt yourself.
I didn't respond.
And I'm sorry about your mother. We searched everywhere for you two, but you didn't stay in one place long enough. We were too late.
My heart squeezed in my chest. Yeah, you were too late. Another few minutes of silence filled the Hummer.
Why did your mother leave 3 years ago?
I peeked through the curtain of my hair. Aiden watched me as he waited for an answer to his loaded question. I don't know. Since the age of 7, I had been a half-blood in training, one of the so-called privileged halves. We had 2 options in life, either attend the Covenant or go into the working class. Halves who had a pure blood willing to speak for them and foot the cost of an education were enrolled in the Covenant to train as sentinels or guards. The other halves weren't so lucky. They were rounded up by the Masters, a group of pures who excelled at the art of compulsion. An elixir had been created out of a special blend of poppy flowers and tea. The concoction worked differently in a half's blood. Instead of leaving them lethargic and sleepy, the refined poppy made them compliant and vacant, giving them a high they never came down from. Masters started indentured halves on the elixir at the age of 7, the age of reason, and continued on in daily doses. No education, no freedom. The Masters were ultimately responsible for dealing out the elixir and monitoring the behaviors of the halves in servitude. They were also the ones who marked them on their forehead, a circle with a line through it, the painfully visible sign of slavery. All halves feared that future. Even if we did end up training in the Covenant, it took only one wrong move before we were given the drink that keeps on giving. What my mom did by pulling me out of the Covenant, without so much as an explanation, was a major strike against me. I was also sure taking half of her husband's, my stepfather's, fortune wouldn't help me out any, either. Then there were all those times I should have contacted the Covenant and turned my mom in, done what was expected of me. One stupid call would have saved her life. The Covenant would hold that against me, too. The memory of waking up and stumbling into my worst nightmare resurfaced. The day before, she'd asked that I clean up the balcony garden I'd demanded on having, but I'd slept in. By the time I'd gotten up and grabbed the little bag of garden tools, it had been noon. Figuring Mom was already working on the garden, I'd gone out on the balcony, but the garden was empty. I'd stood there for a while, staring down at the alley across the street, toying with the garden spade. Then, from the shadows, a man had stepped out, The demon. He'd stood there in broad daylight, staring up at me. He'd been so close I could have chucked the spade and hit him. With my heart in my throat, I jerked back from the railing. I'd rushed back into the house, screaming for her. There'd been no answer. Rooms had blurred as I'd raced down the tiny hallway toward her bedroom and pushed open the door. What I'd seen would haunt me forever. Blood, so much blood, and Mom's eyes, open and vacant, staring at nothing.
"We're here."
Kane leaned forward eagerly. All my thoughts vanished as my stomach did a funny twist. I turned and stared out the window. Deity Island actually consisted of 2 islands. The Pures lived in their fancy homes on the first island. To the outside world, it looked like any normal island community. Small shops and restaurants lined the streets. There were even shops run by mortals and tailored to them. The pristine beaches were to die for. Demons didn't like to travel across water. When a Pure turned all dark side, their elemental magic twisted and could only be accessed if they were touching Earth. Being out of contact weakened them. It made an island the perfect hidey hole for our kind. It was too early for anyone to be on the streets, and in a matter of minutes we passed over the second bridge. On this part of Deity Island, nestled among marshlands, beaches, and forests virtually untouched by man, stood the Covenant. Rising up between the endless sea and acres of white beaches, the sprawling sandstone structure we passed was a school where Pures and Halves attended classes. With its thick marble columns and strategically placed statues of the gods, it was an intimidating and otherworldly place. Mortals thought the Covenant was an elite private school where none of their children would ever have the privilege of attending. They were right. People had to have something super special in their blood to make it this far. Beyond the main building were the dorms, and they too boasted more columns and statues. Smaller buildings and bungalows dotted the landscape, and the massive gyms and training facilities sat adjacent to the courtyard. They always reminded me of the ancient colosseums, except ours were enclosed. Hurricanes could be a real bitch around these parts. It was all beautiful, a place I loved and hated at the same time. Seeing it now, I realized just how badly I'd missed it, and Mom. She'd stayed on the main island while I'd gone to school, but she'd been a fixture around the campus, popping up and taking me to lunch after classes, swaying the old dean to allow me to stay with her during the weekends. Gods, I just wanted one more chance, one more second to tell her. I checked myself. Control. I needed to be in control right now, and caving into the lingering grief wasn't going to help me. Steeling myself, I climbed out of the Hummer and followed Aiden to the girls' dorm. We were the only ones moving down the silent hallways. With it being the beginning of summer, only a few students would be running around.
"Get cleaned up. I'll return for you in a little bit."
He started to turn, but stopped.
"I'll find something for you to wear and leave it on the table."
I nodded, at a loss for words. Even though I was trying to push the emotions down, some of them seeped through. 3 years ago, my entire future had been perfectly planned. All the instructors at the Covenant had praised my abilities in the training sessions. They even went as far as to say I could become a Sentinel. Sentinels were the best, and I'd been one of the best. 3 years without any training had set me back behind every half. A lifetime of servitude most likely waited for me, a future I couldn't face. Being subject to the Pure's wills, having no control or say over anything, the possibility scared the crap out of me. A possibility made worse by my nearly all-consuming need to hunt demons. Fighting them was ingrained in my blood, but after seeing what had happened to Mom, the desire skyrocketed. Only the Covenant could provide the means for achieving my goals, and my absentee, pure-blooded uncle now held my future in his hands. My footsteps felt heavy as I moved around the familiar rooms. They were fully furnished, seeming larger than I remembered. The room had a separate living area and a decent-sized bedroom, and it had its own bathroom. The Covenant offered only the best to its students. I took a longer-than-necessary shower, reveling in the feeling of being clean again. People took things like showers for granted. I knew I had. After the demon attack, I'd hit the road with little cash. Staying alive had turned out to be more important than a shower. Once I was sure all the grime was washed away.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?